Hello, and welcome to Spectral Searches Insights. In this segment, we will be learning about the spectral plane from a variety of different sources, ranging from scholars of various religious or philosophical groups to individuals that have had hands-on and direct experiences. Today, we'll be meeting with Professor Dale Allison, a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary with a specialty in New Testament and Second Temple Judaism, and an author of many books, including Night Comes, Death, Imagination, and the Last Things. Hello?
Hello,
Hey, how are you?
I'm just fine. Thank you. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. So I guess just to start off, if you just want to introduce yourself, just your names, your qualifications. Um, yeah.
Okay, well, my name is Dale Allison, and I'm a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary. My specialty, I suppose, is the New Testament and Second Temple Judaism. I've written books on early Christian beliefs about the end, and I've also written a book on death and what might lie beyond that from a Christian point of view. In any case, I'm probably best known for my work on Matthew and the historical Jesus.
That's really interesting because I know I mentioned you. I reached out to Bart Ehrman because my
Uh-huh.
mom loves his book, so he recommended you. I didn't realize you had written those books on the perfect subject for what I'm talking to you about. So it makes absolute sense that he'd recommend you. So with that context and your background, what is your personal belief or religion or spirituality, or would you describe yourself in some way in those regards?
Well, I would say I'm a Christian, but I'm an idiosyncratic Christian, so it's kind of hard to pin me down. I don't know that I fit any of the boxes very well. So I'm traditional about some things, I'm liberal about other things. Sometimes I'm a little conservative, sometimes I'm quite radical about this and that. So again, you can't put me in a box, but maybe you could say that I tend towards the mystical and my favorites in the Christian tradition tend to be mystics. Uh, and beyond that, I would say I'm very interested, have been my whole life, in the paranormal and regard religion and the paranormal as closely related subjects because religion tends to interpret the paranormal in religious terms. I actually think that's how religions get started, with people trying to understand and interpret unusual and strange experiences that they've had. So studying the paranormal and studying religion for me are very closely related.
Almost like two faces of the same coin, sort of speak.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, religions don't start when people just sit around the campfire and say, let's make some stuff up. Let's just decide, wouldn't it be great if there were a hell? That's just not how things work. Things happen to people, and then they struggle to understand them. And then religious ideas, in my view, grow out of that. So religious ideas are attempts to understand uh, unusual, paranormal, mystical, religious, miraculous experiences. They're the attempt of the human mind to figure out what just happened to me, or what just happened to us, or what just happened to so and so.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, it's definitely. I would think I would agree with you on that because I don't think that anyone sits down and just thinks these things up overnight and
Yeah.
then somehow manages to get that to collectively catch on to everyone, right? You need some sort of deeper understanding.
No,
So
so I was just gonna, if I may, just one little brief
absolutely.
illustration. So uh, I'm not a Hindu, but I had studied Hinduism at the time I had this experience. So one day I wake up on the couch, I was in my 20s, and I looked through the window in my apartment at the building across the street, and I knew all of a sudden, out of the blue, that I was the building, and the building was me, and everything was one, and so on. And I remember being overwhelmed by this certainty for several seconds. And when the feeling, or whatever it was, left, I remember thinking, wow, if I were a Hindu, I would know what to make of that. I would just say, Atman is Brahman, all is one. But since I'm a Christian, I just said, huh, what was that? But that was actually an important experience for me because it helped me to realize that the Hindu doctrine, all is one, or thou art that, Atman is Brahman, is actually a codification of an experience. That is, this is actually a fairly common experience that people have, a mystical experience where they feel at one with everything. There's a sort of unity, and for a little while, it will drive out all other sensations and thoughts and be overwhelming. So it seems like that's what reality is. So I think that happens with all sorts of beliefs. If you look into them, you can see the common human experiences that lie behind them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So with that being said, with the afterlife and a bigger experiences, do you personally believe in ghosts?
So that's a trick question. So I would respond by saying, first of all, I don't believe that ghosts are a single thing. That is, I think there are, if you want to use that big category, there are all sorts of different types of apparitions. So that would be the first thing. And I suppose it would be tedious to go through and talk about the different sorts of apparitions. But the second thing I'd want to say is you have to draw a distinction between subjective fact and interpretation. So if you're asking me, do people see ghosts? Then the answer to that is you have to be completely ignorant to say, no, they don't. People do see ghosts, or they think they see ghosts. They have experiences where they think they are seeing a dead husband or a dead uh, relative or a dead loved one or a dead stranger or whatnot. So every single member of my immediate family, this includes myself, has seen a what you call ghost or an apparition or something that isn't there in the normal course of things, right? So the question isn't, do people see such things? They do. And in fact, we know enough now from the social psychologists to know that this is pretty common. There's a large percentage of the populace that has visionary experiences. The only question is, how do we interpret them? And then again, it's very complex because I think that some visions or apparitions are purely subjective, endogenous, that is simply within the person, and there's nothing outside corresponding to this. I think others are projections to incoming data. That is, I think that our minds can receive things from elsewhere, not just through the eyes and the ears, and that in response to that, we can project things. But there are also these odd experiences where multiple people for a brief period of time will experience an apparition. And so you think there must be some sort of objective something there to that if that happens. But then there are also these really interesting cases when there's an apparition and there are several people there, and let's say two people see it and two people don't. What what do you do with that? So
Mhm.
I'm not answering these questions. I'm saying this is a really complex area. And when people say yes or they say no, I'm not interested in the conversation. I want to just to look at what kinds of apparitions you are talking about and the possible various explanations for each one. And I'll also add to that that I don't wish to appear or sound like an expert. I'm not sure anybody in this subject is an expert. I think there are lots of things we don't know. And I'm also one of those who thinks there are lots of things we can't know because of the way we live with the brains of mammals. And all we have to do is look at any other mammal, and we know there are lots of things they can't figure out. We know there are things that we know that our dogs can never figure out, right? Or the chimpanzees can never figure out, and so on. We're vain and pompous and stupid, and we think because we can understand more than the other animals that we should be able to understand everything. I really think there are severe limits to human understanding. And I think there are certain experiences that push our understanding. So at the end of the day, I will say a few things about apparitions or maybe ghosts. but I'd like to do so with great modesty, recognizing that I can be wrong, and that whatever hypothesis or theory I come up with, there are almost always things or data that don't fit. So all my hypotheses are imperfect.
Yeah.
So again, modesty, humility.
I mean, there's always outliers, right? Like you're saying, there's
Yes.
always going to be the situations that are unexplainable, whether it be, someone seeing something that someone else can't see, or the experiences that collectively people have that can't be explained. So yeah, it's
Uh-huh.
definitely, yeah. So I mean, I guess in regard to that, and with what you've already said, do you believe in an afterlife?
Sure. Yes, I do.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it seemed like an
So
easy question for that
yeah,
one,
well,
but
that's well, it's not really an easy question. I should add that, of course, I know friends who are really intelligent and highly informed who think I'm wrong about this, right? And I mean no disrespect for them when I say that I do. I'm actually I'd like to think that when I'm on my deathbed, I am going to be uh, okay with this, all right, and that I'm actually going to be looking forward to something else. Um, Once in a while, actually, to be personal and honest, uh, I'm looking forward to something else or something else new. I get tired, I get worn out, and sometimes, um, yeah, I'm just getting old. I'm older than you are, right? And I'm in my late 60s now, and I can see the end coming up. And I don't think I'm just going to be blown out like a candle. I expect to go elsewhere, and I'm hoping it's another adventure.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so again, I think we're both on the same page with not wanting to speak too much about an entire group or anything like that. So like I was saying in the questions here, while to make a proclamation about the beliefs of or understandings of an entire religious group would be an inductive generalization, and I don't want to do that. As an expert in the field, more so I guess on the Christianity end, as you said, you're not an expert in
Uh,
the field. For paranormal, which I also agree. I don't think anyone's an expert in this. Whenever you do find someone that's an expert in it, you know, there's so many different perspectives. Um, what would your thoughts be on how the Christian faith perceives ghosts, and do they exist like biblically in the Bible?
So, well, first of all, the Bible does know about ghosts. You might remember that at the end of the Gospel of Luke, when the risen Jesus appears, uh, there is a question: Are you a ghost, or are you something more than a ghost? Are you more real than a ghost? Or again, in the Gospel of Mark, when the disciples are on the Sea of Galilee and Jesus in the story comes walking on the water, they think, oh, maybe it's an apparition. So passages like this show us that the people in the Bible lived with the idea of ghosts. They knew what an apparition was, just as we do in our time and place. There's also famously one of the stories in the Bible is where a necromancer, brings up somebody from the dead, and there's a little conversation and so on. And it's told, this story, uh, as though it's just something that happened. It's not a parable, it's not a story, and the people in it are not condemned. So yes, there are such things in the Bible. This is not Ghosts are not a modern invention. Ghosts, broadly speaking, uh, appear in ancient China. You can find them in Egypt. They're in Greek literature. They're in Roman literature. My own view is that the scene of apparitions is probably a universal or near universal human fact. And it's one of the reasons almost all cultures have had some sort of belief in a world after this one, or a life to come, or that the dead live on in some way. It may not always be pleasant or wonderful, may not always be heaven, but you have to work really hard. And I'm not sure you can do it to find a culture in which everyone just thinks death is the end and there's nothing beyond that.
Yeah, I think especially as we reach into like a larger globalization and multicultural kind of world, you're gonna get those kind of bleeding
Yep.
through of different cultures mixing together. You're never gonna find a whole group that just collectively,
Yep.
unless their stance is entirely on that,
Yeah,
which
yeah, that's true.
by all means then.
If you read the old Greek epitaphs or the Roman epitaphs, you'll discover that many of them are hopeful and looking forward to reunion with the dead, and then some of them are cynical. So it's a mix. But I wanted to go back maybe to the question about Christianity and say that certainly there are biblical texts which assume that there are ghosts, but there is this debate down through Christian history as to how we might interpret them. So the problem, I think the main problem is that for many Christians, this would be, for example, the Protestant reformers and also Augustine way back there in the fourth century, they think that when people die, they either go to a good place or to a bad place. It's sort of very dualistic and it's heaven or hell. And therefore, they don't know what to do with ghosts, or let's say they can't take them at face value. Because if you have a sighting of your dead husband, and that doesn't make sense if your husband is either in heaven or in hell, right? So there are Christians, Augustine was one, who talks about this issue and says, well, I think some of them might be angels and some of them might be demons. So, when it's a good experience or leads to the good, then it's an angel. When it's a bad one, it's probably a demon. But he's not sure about this and he wonders and so on. But what happens with Protestants is that their religion gets going with the rejection of purgatory. And purgatory is the belief that you don't go to heaven immediately upon death and you don't go to hell. You're in this intermediate state. And so medieval Catholicism didn't have any trouble with ghosts. They didn't have any desire or need to reject them. And then as soon as Protestantism shows up, you find the leaders discouraging people from reporting ghost stories, and they'll say, you know what, if you see somebody, it's probably the devil or you're mentally ill. And I actually think a lot of Protestants, a lot of modern skepticism has its roots in the Reformation, where the early reformers say, hey, if you've had a vision, it's demonic or something's wrong with you. Whereas the Catholics could just say, you just saw a dead person, right?
Yeah.
So this gets very complicated. It's already complicated in the fourth century, and then it gets very complicated with the Reformation. And you get Christian groups who simply say it's not possible that a ghost is a dead person because they're in heaven or hell. You can't be seeing them.
Yeah. You definitely kind of jumped ahead on some of my questions there. Just
Oh,
answering
I'm
that one
sorry.
already. No, it's perfectly fine. It just as you're looking like, oh, I guess that's one of the next ones coming up.
Oh,
So
okay.
you already got
All
to
right.
it. So the next question that I had, which I think you also kind of touched on this too. Um, I found a number of passages, just a very simple Google search, so I didn't go too in depth on
Uh-huh.
this, related to the concept of life after death. I understand that sometimes with a modern interpretation of scripture, we can skew the meaning of what it initially was supposed to be saying to us, and you can make it fit the culture of today.
Uh-huh.
So do you believe that, there's a handful of quotes I have here or like passages that they would be correctly understood by people today, or do you think that they'd be misinterpreted or potentially just kind of obsoleted?
Yeah.
So the first one I got here is from Job. And I also just want to say, like, as I said, I didn't do a big deep search here. So you've already kind of proved some of this to be inaccurate. But in Job, which this probably falls into a lot of what you're talking about, as a cloud vanishes and is gone, so one who does, sorry,
It's okay.
as a cloud vanishes and is gone, so one who goes down to the grave does not return. He will never come back to his house again. His place will know him no more.
Uh-huh.
The next one is when their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. In Hebrews, people are destined to die once, and after that, to face judgment. In Leviticus, regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after the wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. And then Leviticus again, a man also or a woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. To me, as someone that isn't like my mother's a minister, me looking at just these very specific quotes would be to regard that these individuals didn't believe in a ghost and more so just a direct heaven or hell kind of division. But would I, as someone that is doing this as from a modern interpretation without the history, would I be interpreting that incorrectly, do you think?
So I think this is a very difficult question. So you're giving us quotations from the Bible, but they are from different books. And the way to think about the Bible is that it's a collection of books written by different people over at least 1,000-year period.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
you cannot assume at any point that they're all agreeing with each other or that they have the same point of view. Now, the way I would reconstruct this is I would say in the earliest parts of biblical times, people, most of them probably believed in Sheol, which is a sort of bad place to go. It's not really life. It's a world of shadows, and people can get very depressed when they think about it or talk about it, and talk even as though sometimes as though God is not there. But later on, you get the notion of the resurrection of the dead. That is not an early belief. It's a belief that develops later. And then you also get developing over time the notion that maybe not everybody who has died is in Sheol, in a bad place. Maybe people go to a good place, and there's a differentiation between fates. You may also have some skepticism in the Bible. Now, maybe Job is skeptical at points. Maybe the book of Ecclesiastes is skeptical at points. But I don't think those were ever the dominant belief in Israel. And the archaeologists will tell you that if you dig up the graves and look at them, there was always what they call a cult of the dead. People were always bringing offerings to those who were dead, and there's some sort of ongoing relationship. We also know from the texts that disapprove of necromancy that it must have been going on, because you get lots of protests about this. The last two verses you quoted were from Leviticus, and I think that everything needs to be put in context. So the Bible is put together by people who are associated with the temple, or they're associated with kingship in Jerusalem. And there's a sort of official Jewish or Israelite religion, but there's also the religion of the countryside, the religion of the populace, what's going on, outside the control or the reach of, let's say, the priests around the temple. And we know that many of these people had continued engagement with the dead. And I think the few places in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament where people say, you don't want to have anything to do with familiar spirits, you shouldn't consult a wizard or a medium or something like that, it's because those things at that time were not within the realm of the priesthood in Jerusalem. Those were still thought of by them as idolatrous things. That is, they are connected with the traditional gods of Canaan or the gods of the countryside. They're not part of the official Yahwistic or Israelite religion. And so when they condemn those things, they are not condemning, let's say, scientific investigation of spirits. What they are condemning is what, from their view, was idolatry, because it involved, in their point of view, adherence to or paying attention to gods or spirits that weren't the one God of Israel, okay? That weren't part of the official religion. And I have a problem with people who just quote these texts from Leviticus as though their meaning is the same in every time and place. So if, for example, you say, well, the Bible condemns mediums, and anyone who consults a medium is dealing with the devil, and so on, that just makes no sense. Of, let's say, somebody like William James, who was one of America's greatest philosophers and probably our greatest psychologist. One of the things he did is he studied mediums. All right, he studied mediums, and he studied them scientifically. And he found one woman who he thought could come up with information or answers to questions that she shouldn't be able to answer. All right. Uh, she was a very important person in his life, very influential in his thinking. And he said, I have no reason to think that the dead or a dead person is speaking through her, although it's possible. But I'm interested in trying to figure out what's going on here as a psychologist, and also as somebody who's interested in metaphysics and what the world is like, and so on. And I don't think that has anything to do with what's going on in Leviticus, right? Now, I have no idea what you are doing when you're going ghost hunting. My guess is it probably has nothing to do with religious rites, or that the sort of thing that is concerning to the authors of the book of Leviticus. So for me, you have to make these distinctions. There are different points of view in the Bible, and we, when it comes to many things, occupy a very different time and place. For me, I grew up with a secular education, and my professors, in effect, told me that materialism was the truth. We were all biological machines. There's no invisible world. There's no life after death. There is no God. There are no spirits, and so on. So for me, things like ghosts are interesting because if there is any objectivity to any apparitions, my professors were wrong. That is, this can be a significant study when you're asking the question, what worldview should I hold, right? And if that's what you're doing with the study of apparitions or ghosts, in my judgment, it has absolutely nothing to do with the book of Leviticus. And if somebody quotes it to me, it's just irrelevant.
Excellent. Yeah. I do understand that the listing off various passages is not a good representation of what the Bible is trying to say. I think it's just the way I've laid things out here. It just kind of fell into place that way. But I definitely understand. That's kind of why I approached it with the idea that, like, with the modern culture, how a lot of people do read the Bible as a one singular book, right? That start, middle, end kind of thing. So I really appreciate all the background, and it really kind of helps to flush out what the, I'm gonna say, true meaning of the thing is, but not saying the true meaning as much as like how it's applicable to its time and place. You already answered this one on communication, whether or not it's with demons or angels, back historical times. Geez, got me all, I was so paying attention that I lost track what I was doing over here.
Well, I don't know. If you're asking about demons and angels and ghosts in antiquity, people are everybody knows that there are apparitions, and everybody knows that people claim to see the dead. The only question is, how do we understand this? And many Christians understood it quite literally and thought, when they saw somebody who had been dead, that this was the spirit of the dead person. It's only when you get systematic thinkers like Augustine that you begin to think, well, maybe this is an illusion, or it's not real, or it's created by an angel, or it's created by a devil. My own view, theologically and philosophically and practically and every other way, is that you can be really simplistic here. So you can say, for example, well, it was an angel or it was a demon, right? Or it was a ghost or it was a hallucination. And for me, there's always a spectrum between these two things. I think one of the shortcomings of the Christian tradition is, well, if it belongs to the invisible world, it's either God or the angels or the devil and demons. I think that's a really simplistic view of the world. Everything in the visible world is a mess and is rich and diverse and so on. If there is an invisible realm, I see no reason to think it's just black or white or good and evil or angels or demons or God and Satan. That makes no sense to me. And I think personally that a lot of paranormal events don't make any sense within a religious context or actually any context. They're just totally weird and strange and bizarre. And you can say, well, this was caused by a jinn or a mischievous spirit or fairies or elves or whatever you want to say. But I'm really reluctant when something happens to think immediately, oh, okay, is it an angel or a demon? That's just not what we should be doing. All right.
It's a bit too
That's not just,
binary.
pardon?
It's a bit too binary of a system.
Yeah,
Sort of
it's just
this or
this
this.
whole binary, and lots of things in the world are not like that, right? In fact, most of life is very complex, and there's a lot of shades of gray everywhere, right? Not
Absolutely.
just black or white. So my preference is when something odd happens, and it's not obviously terribly, horribly evil and wicked, then we should look at it and say, what the heck was that? Do I really have any criteria by which to figure this out? Is this a puzzle that I can solve, or is it just a puzzle and so on? So I guess personally, I'm really allergic to people who want to invoke demons right and left to explain anything that doesn't fit their system. I don't think that's thinking. I think it's a cop out.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree
And
with that.
also maybe a sign of insecurity because they don't want the world to be the complex, weird thing it is, so that they want everything to fit, their few boxes, and that's just not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like a level of security by giving an insecurity.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think so.
So obviously there are also non-canonical Christian texts that have a bit more diversity to them with regard to a hierarchy with God and whatnot. Are there any that you know of that have also some understandings of, say, ghosts or spirits that you could interact with?
Well, off the top of my head, if I'm thinking of Gnostic texts, the idea would be that I don't recall uh, any ordinary apparitions, but people are always seeing Jesus in Gnostic texts after his death. So there are lots of dialogues with a dead person, if you want to put it that way. But you know what? The Book of Revelation also has somebody who goes to heaven and sees the Lamb, and Paul in a book known as Second Corinthians says that at one point he went to what he calls the third heaven. And interestingly, he says, I don't know whether I was in the body or out of the body. He doesn't even know how to interpret his own experience. He thinks it was real because he says, I was in this other place, but how he got there, I don't know. Um, so the answer to your question, as you put it to me, is no, not off the top of my head, but I do know that just in general, the realm of the living and the dead, they interact in the ancient Greek world, they interact in the Roman world, and they interact in the early Christian world. You end up uh, in Christianity, at least before Protestantism, with people who pray to saints, right? And people in the tradition often see saints also. So there is this regular interaction or belief that the realm of the dead doesn't take spirits away from us and put them in a place where they can't communicate and so on. So, yeah, I can't give you chapter and verse on a
Oh,
Gnostic text,
that's
which is an
yeah.
ordinary apparition, but certainly they're talking to Jesus an awful lot.
So I guess kind of similarly, are there Because yes, obviously a lot of people end up talking to Jesus throughout, like after his crucifixion and whatnot. Are there instances of anyone speaking to someone from beyond the grave? I guess more specifically, because as you've mentioned, there are obviously necromancy is regarded in there. There are other instances where they've talked uh, about the fact that there might be something else. But are there anything like written out of someone talking to someone that hasn't been resurrected? Because I believe Lazarus was also resurrected, so I'm kind of grouping that into like a not counting kind of segment
So,
there.
so if you're talking about the New Testament, I don't think so. There is that passage in the Old Testament where Samuel and Saul encounter each other, and one is dead and one is living, and they do have a conversation, although that's through a medium or an intermediary. Um, but so you're asking for something particularly from the first century? Because, if it's an open-ended question, then the answer is easy. That is, people all the time interact with the dead. Again, uh, I'm not embarrassed to say I think I saw a dead person once, or rather, that person who was dead for 3 days woke me up one night and appeared to me, and several weeks later actually came to me and told me to do something, which I did. Uh, my my wife and brother and middle son and my daughter all claim to have interacted with my father after he died, within, not a long period after he died. So these things are common, and because ghost stories, if you will, occur all over the world, I know that they are occurring all the time. Again, social psychologists who talk about these things now and interview people know this is really common. There's no reason to think it wasn't common in other times and places. I'm inclined to think if it's not commonly in the sources, it's just because the culture or the people who are running the religious culture are interested in other things. It's not because the experiences aren't there. I remember reading a couple of Protestant sermons that said, you know what? Now that we've become Protestants, people have quit seeing ghosts. And I remember thinking, no, they haven't quit seeing them. You've told them that if they see a ghost, it's from the devil or you're crazy. So of course they're not reporting them, right? You have to be aware always that cultures can promote certain experiences and they can censor certain experiences, right? But I guess I would say, now that I've been rambling on and on about this, in some of the collections of stories of monks in early Christianity, those people do have visions of dead people, of other monks, and holy people from the Bible, and so on. So yeah, I can think of now, it just popped into my head. I guess I haven't thought about this enough, but yeah, there's a very famous monk from the 5th century who claims encounters with Moses and Elijah and other dead saints. It's just there,
Yeah,
but
that's
that shouldn't
awesome.
surprise. That shouldn't surprise, because I think it's everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just comes down to, looking at the different interpretations that
Yeah.
we have, especially when you're looking at more literalist understandings of it versus a more dynamic understanding of it, I guess. I guess I'm just looking to see uh, other perspectives on it, I guess. So it's also been suggested that just from different people that I've known, that if you are a true Christian, you should not be trying to communicate with the dead because it's wrong. So do you still think that stands true? You kind of already answered that with
Well,
regard
yeah,
to
yeah, but
Leviticus as
but
well.
listen. So from a Christian's point of view, um, there is a concern about idolatry. So Christians don't want people to worship false gods. All right. And so if they think that's what you're doing by being a medium or being a ghost hunter, well, then I understand them, even though in most instances I think that they are incorrect, right? Uh, but you also have to say, whatever it is, whether it's politics or romantic relationships or whatever, bad things happen, evil things happen. You always have to be on your guard for bad things. And the paranormal isn't any different. You know, we have good and bad and everything in between in regular life. I think we have it in the paranormal. So uh, there are rotten, lousy, evil things that are invisible and that happen to people, and you need to pay attention to that. But again, to go back to what I said earlier, if if your context is a secular world in which a lot of people don't believe anything, then this is an interesting activity if you can convince yourself or others that there truly are things beyond, let's say, contemporary science or things beyond what your teachers in high school or college taught you. Uh, that's really interesting and it's really important. So I see the world still, and maybe things are changing. I still see the world often through the worldview that my professors in college gave me, which was a very secularized, there are no spirits kind of world. There is no transcendence. And one of the reasons that the paranormal has always interested me is because I thought if any of this is true, I have some reasons to think maybe there is something more than what we just see and more than what goes on in the the chemicals of the brain and whatnot. So if you're looking at this for philosophical reasons, if you're looking at this for scientific reasons, that's completely different than consulting a necromancer because you want to have power or you want to, do evil things or you want to know the future so you can hatch your plans and so on. And I think those are the things that people have traditionally been worried about. And again, I don't think that's all nonsense, but it probably has nothing to do with what most ghost hunters today are doing.
Yeah,
Although I must get
absolutely.
that. So you wrote me and told me you were doing some ghost hunting. I may be one of the few people who has never seen a ghost hunting show. I understand they're on TV and they may be on YouTube and so on. So I really don't know what I'm speaking about, but I assume that it's driven by curiosity more than anything else, not by ulterior, religious motives. That's
Yeah.
probably not what's going on, but that is what's going on, I think, in the book of Leviticus. That's what those people are worried about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think if you're not watching ghost hunting shows, all you're missing is a whole lot of silence. A whole lot of, is
Okay.
anybody there?
So have you had any
Silence.
luck? Have you had any luck?
I'm actually in the middle of me and my friend stayed at one of the most haunted places in Ontario recently. I actually think it's in Canada recently. And we had what looked so this is going to be, I don't know why I'm releasing this video versus that video. What I try to do is do the one video kind of showcasing what we saw and then another video
Okay.
afterwards that's kind of like more analyzing it to see
Uh-huh.
if there's anything deeper to it. And the one thing it really seemed like, we had like the K2 EMF reader. It just picks up electromagnetic fields, and my buddy's asking it questions and it's going off, and it's like one for yes, don't, like nothing for no, and it's going. We're like this, I'm like this is looking really, like this looks really good. And at one point we're like, okay, can you go, and I have one and he has one, like can you go over to that one over there on that chair? And then that
Uh-huh.
one started going off, and I was like, whoa, like that's the best proof I've ever seen of this. But
Uh-huh.
then reviewing the footage, the number of times we ignored it going off, right? So you see my buddy asking questions,
Yeah.
and it'll be like these little tiny blips, and no one's saying anything. And then he'd be like, are you there? And it does the exact same little blip. He's like, that's it, it's there. And I was
Uh,
like, is it?
uh-huh.
And when I was in the moment too, I was like, this is great. Like this looks perfect. But rewatching it from a camera and like just paying attention to the little blips, I
Uh-huh.
was like, there might be a bit of a confirmation bias going on in this
Yeah.
moment right here. But yeah, so that was, even with the EMF going off, even if it was confirmation bias, it was definitely an interesting thing because it seemed like there's patterns to it, but it also seemed kind of inconsistent. Sometimes it was very strong. So if it was coming from a device that was nearby, why was it so inconsistent?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we did the same, like I did it with another group of friends going to Ghost Road, very similar thing where we used the EMF and it was just going crazy. And I'm like, I don't see any radio towers around. Like, I don't know what could be doing this. So there are a few times, same with like EVPs, where you hear like the electronic voice phenomenon.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You hear something, and it's never enough to be like that was definitely a thing, but it's always
Yeah.
like that kind of sounded like someone said yes, or like that kind of sounded like they said his name, and it's enough to be like, this is interesting. We need to keep doing
Uh-huh.
this.
Yeah.
So
But see, that's all science. That's
yes,
science, right? Okay. Anybody who complains about science doesn't, I don't understand. That's it. I just don't get it.
yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I am trying to take this on a bit more. So during that one, we set up an interview with the owner of the building and
Huh?
kind of got some of her perspectives. At the same time, I'm also trying to like incorporate in. Um, sorry, my cat is currently licking my elbow.
A
Also
beautiful
trying to,
cat. It's a beautiful cat.
yeah, he's a troublemaker sometimes. Yeah, trying to get a bit more just the background and see different people's perspectives and not just make claims. Like, just because I didn't
Uh-huh.
see anything there doesn't mean, like you're saying, other people could be seeing something that I'm not seeing. There's the my buddy's talked about how he's getting really cold and really warm. I can't quantify that. I can't say what
Yeah.
he's feeling. So I'm just
Uh-huh.
going to take that as something that happened to him that didn't happen to me. I'm not going to say there's nothing here. It's just that in that moment there was nothing there for me.
Yeah.
Um, I can't make it like it hasn't been enough to make a believer out of me, but I'm not going to say that it's not possible
Uh,
for someone else,
uh,
or it's not possible in general. It's just nothing has convinced me yet,
yeah. Uh-huh.
personally. So that's where I've been standing on this. But I also, I want to make sure that we're doing everything incredibly respectfully. I'm not discrediting anyone else's opinions or discrediting anyone else's experiences.
Yeah. But it just struck me, this popped into my head, that you're a bit like, let's say, the people who explore these cases that they put under the category of reincarnation. So sometimes small children will tell stories, or they'll have ostensible memories, and then they're investigated, and then supposedly these memories will match the memories of a dead person, or match something that happened. So you could look at this as a Christian and you could protest theologically, well, we don't believe in reincarnation. I think that's a horrible mistake. You simply need to take into account whatever the facts are. And if people are looking at these stories, and maybe someday everyone will look at them and say, yeah, reincarnation is true, then you'll just have to readjust your religious system. It's kind of like the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis does, as it stands on a literal reading, indicate that the world was created a few thousand years ago. Okay, it wasn't. It was created a long time before that, right? And you don't read Genesis to get your science. If you want your science, you get it elsewhere. I actually think it's the same thing, should be, for Christians theologically. Um, Theologically, apart from parables and stories, I think theologically Christians are probably committed to God will win, and the dead are with their Savior, and right. But the living are with their Savior now. So it doesn't give you much concrete anything. And I think if that we just need to be informed by as much as possible. And I think we should pay attention to whatever you're doing if you come up with something significant. And we should be paying attention to everybody who's exploring the edges of knowledge, or things that we're not supposed to explore because they go beyond the current boundaries. But I think we should.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think, just I guess the science part of me is very like, like we should be looking into
Yeah.
the edges of what we know, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean, some people would say just because we can doesn't mean we should. A lot of people that watch Jurassic Park say that, but I mean, I see nothing wrong with the dinosaur
Well,
part.
well, well. Jurassic Park is a little different, right?
A
You're
little
not.
bit different, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're not going to
Point
be
being,
doing.
we should. I think there is merit to looking.
Yes, but I hope and assume that you would do that. I don't know what this means at this point, but if an ethical framework were relevant. I would hope you would operate within an ethical framework. You probably are to some extent, because it sounds to me like you're ethically committed to the truth. That is, you're trying to live within this imperative to get the facts right rather than just make things up and be irresponsible. So, um, yeah, there's always a place for ethics, even I think in science, because you have to report your results honestly and obtain them honestly.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's definitely some good indications of or demonstrations that have been done to show that people haven't done that
Oh
in
yeah,
papers. There's some really interesting ones, the people getting caught. Um,
yep.
yeah, for sure. So again, I mean, you already answered my last question here. Basically, my last question is going to be if we did find some sort of irrefutable evidence of the communication, um, something very clearly coming through on an EVP, or just we could not deny that it was ever a random chance, something like that. What would you personally believe if it was a ghost or a demon or an angel or something else? But you've already kind of elaborated on that previously.
I,
Um,
so I wouldn't bring any category to it. I would say, oh, this is new, this is interesting, this is different. Let's figure it out without operating with our confirmation bias or making sure that it fits within our worldview. I personally think that whatever worldview we have, the walls should be broken and crooked so that things can come in to inform our worldview. If our worldview is just what we have inside a brick wall, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm all for open-mindedness, and that means no religious bigotry. It also means no materialistic bigotry. It means saying, what the heck is going on here? Let's be honest about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess the only other thing I didn't submit this to you previously when I sent you the questions, but you did mention that, if we have a very diverse, um, I'll say afterlife or diverse
Uh-huh.
invisible kind of world around us, you could have things that are very like evil or bad out there. Do you think there is much risk um, with what we do, with what me and my friends are doing? Again, I would like to say we are not necromancers, so I haven't tried to raise anything yet. But do you think that there's a
So,
risk of?
so you would have to. So I assume that what you're doing is something that other people have done, and there must be a sort of society or social group. And within that group, you would have stories. And if those stories that are circulating aren't aren't full of warning and telling you that people got possessed by demons from doing what you're doing and so on, if those warnings aren't there, then I wouldn't worry about it. If every other ghost hunter said, "Yeah, I got possessed by a demon and ended up in the mental ward," then yeah, you'd be stupid not to be worried about this. But I'm guessing at this point you're not getting such stories, and you have no reason to be afraid of what you're doing. So uh, I think you know living with your conscience as best you can. You need to be as curious as possible, and until something jumps out that says, "Hey, I'm the devil," or or has horrific consequences. I don't know what they would be, but until that signal is there, I wouldn't worry about anything.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you. That's all the questions I have for you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I want to say thanks very much for meeting with me. Uh, it's been very informative, and you're just very pleasant to talk to.
well, thank you very much. I don't want to reiterate. I don't want to come across as an expert. I really think humility is the great virtue when we're looking into stuff like this. And I don't like dogmatism of any kind, right? I believe in a sort of genuine open-mindedness. We all have our prejudices and our worldviews and our religious convictions or lack thereof. But given that we need to pay attention as much as we can to facts and data and let them inform us. So I'm hoping you find something really interesting,
Me
right?
too. Yeah.
I
If I
hope
do,
you
I'll let
become
you know.
famous with the final proof of life beyond this or whatnot. But I will tell you, even if you even if you came up with something really convincing, there would be people who wouldn't believe because it doesn't fit their worldview, and they would just accuse you of planting the evidence,
Absolutely.
right?
It's one of the big things I need to keep reminding myself about this whole channel I'm doing is it's mostly just so I can be creative, edit videos and, hang out
Uh-huh.
with my friends and still search for knowledge. It's not about making this a very successful channel or something.
Yeah.
And I know that if we do find something, you're never going to convince everyone.
Yeah.
So it is very for me, and just my own experiences.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best.
Well, thank you
Wish you
very
the best.
much. I guess that's it then.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Nice to chat.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Our interview with Dr. Allison was very informative. As a society, we tend to view religious groups as singular entities, when in fact they are composites of many different groups with different interpretations and faiths. Throughout time, those beliefs change and grow. The Bible itself needs to be read that way, understanding that each passage, each text, and each parable is a product of its time, and interpretation must be taken with care. Different Christian faiths acknowledge ghosts in the Bible, and the prevalence of necromancy in the Bible shows that for their time, many people believed there was something more after life that could be communicated with our plane of existence. The experiences that others have cannot be denied. We can only listen to them, document them, and look for patterns, while we ourselves are searching for our own experiences in our spectral searches.